Commander Replay. We take a look at the Arm For Battle Wyleth Precon, some budget upgrades you can make, and some other tips and tricks for the deck. Next on Commander Replay. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're looking at making some upgrades for the Arm For Battle Wyleth Soul of Steel Precon. And we're going to talk through a bunch of things with this deck. We're going to figure out some upgrades we can make to the deck, all while keeping the whole thing around $75 for the upgrades with the Precon. So a couple questions that I've been getting a lot of right off the bat are, should I run Wyleth or should I run Akiri? So far in my testing, I've actually been liking Akiri much better than I've been liking Wyleth, and there's two major reasons why. One, Akiri doesn't care which creature you attack with as long as it's equipped, and that's kind of a big deal. Where Wyleth, everything needs to be on Wyleth to be getting the card draw, and I did notice that to be a little bit of a thing. So with Wyleth, there's not a lot of incentive to be running a ton of other creatures in the deck, because you really just want everything piled onto Wyleth. Akiri doesn't care as much, and that becomes relevant if your commander gets blown up, you've had another creature that you've been trying to attack with, and then you would recast Akiri on one turn. It doesn't have haste, so you still send in the other creature to keep getting the card draw. And that type of stuff can matter, so Akiri does allow you to run more creatures, I think. I think Wyleth really incentivizes a low creature count because of that. And the second thing is that Indestructible ability gives you a lot of utility. With Akiri, it's really easy to load up on the board wipes, and I love a board wipe, so I think that's just a great place to be. Wyleth, you have to find some way to protect it if you're planning to wipe the board a lot. It's not built in, so you know, that's a thing. But with Wyleth, it does come with Trample built in, so it has the built-in evasion. Akiri does not have that. But also, Akiri's stats are just bigger. You'll notice that this deck comes with Volcanic Fallout. If you haven't pumped the toughness of Wyleth, which is a thing that does happen early in the game, it's still at 2, Volcanic Fallout will kill Wyleth and some of your other creatures in this deck, which is sort of a tricky thing. Normally you want to make that a little bit more one-sided, and sure, once you get some toughness on there, it's not a big deal, but I did notice it to be an issue in the test game that I played. And by the way, I've actually played about 5 or so games with various versions of the upgraded version of this deck, and all in all, my thoughts on Wyleth are, it's fine, it's not my favorite, it's a little bit slow. It doesn't seem to feel impactful until maybe turn 7, turn 8, which in today's world, if you're going against like a good mid-power deck or something even stronger than that, you know, a lot of those decks can have some pretty serious board states by turn 5, turn 6 if they get a fast start. So I do feel like it's a little bit slow to get going, but later in the game, turn 8, turn 9, turn 10, you're drawing like 4 cards a turn while attacking with Wyleth, getting in some big damage, leaving up some spells to try and protect it. So it's a little bit slow to get going, but I've made even more changes since the gameplay that I filmed with it. And by the way, you should check out the gameplay for it, get a feel on how this deck is playing. Just note that I have made a few additional changes since then, try to speed things up a little bit more, try to cover some more problem areas for the deck, and really just kind of get it running smoothly. So all in all, if you're looking to make these changes to the deck, I would say that it's still going to be a somewhat casual deck, and it should be able to fight some mid-power decks, as long as they don't get out of control super early into the game. One final question before we get going is, should you buy the product? It really depends. If you're someone who's been playing Boros for a while and you have some Boros staples, I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy this deck, but if you're looking to get into Boros, you're looking to try a Boros commander, there are a lot of nice cards just packaged together in this package, and I've seen that they're going for about $20 to $25. So if you don't have a lot of these cards in your collection, it is a nice place to just get a new deck, acquire a bunch of cards that many can be used in other decks down the road and that type of thing. And in a minute, we'll get into what cards we're keeping and what cards we're getting rid of from the Precon to replace with better stuff. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend this deck for everyone. I would recommend it for someone that doesn't have a lot of these cards in their collection, and I think this is a good like introductory Boros Voltron commander type of product. But all in all, if you're planning to run into some fairly strong decks with Wyleth, you're going to need a lot of trial and error, and you're going to need a higher budget beyond what we're going to discuss in this video. So anyway, with that, let's get into the stuff that I'm going to take out of the deck. Okay, so I made a pile of all the cards that I'm looking to cut from the deck, and many of the cards in this pile are either playable in other decks, or I'm even kind of on the fence about for this particular deck, just that I'm trying to add so many things into the deck that I need to pull something out. So there's definitely a few things that could certainly stay. A couple notables are, if you have more creatures in the deck, Odric Lunarch Marshal is good, but I've made the decision to just go with a really low creature count because I think that's what this deck wants. But definitely as a home somewhere. Volcanic Fallout is good for CEDH because a lot of things have 2 toughness or less. Disenchant is reasonable, but doesn't blow you away. Now we've got things like Dismantling Wave, Heliod's Intervention. Typically I'll run those instead, just because more value. You get more value out of the card, but Disenchant, totally very playable. Bone Splitter, I've been back and forth on as well. It's reasonable. It's sort of a redraw. It just depends on how you want your deck to operate, but you could certainly keep it in. Most of the other cards in the deck I'm not impressed with. I just don't think they have enough synergy with what we're doing and or are inefficient in some way or another. So those are things that I want to get rid of. And again, they may have homes in other decks. I just don't think they're great for this particular deck. So you'll see 28 cards in this pile, but I've got the list of cards I want to add, and that's going to be about 35. So even once we get those added in, I'm still going to have to tweak a few things afterwards just to get this down to 100 cards, because there are a lot of deficiencies with this deck, and I'm trying to address as many of them as I can without just creating a brand new deck entirely. So that's been the challenge in this process of just making sure we can address enough problems, make sure we have the synergy, make sure we have the ramp and the removal have definitely been some areas of concern for this deck. Making sure that your ramp and your removal is on point is what's going to allow you to fight stronger decks. If someone has a scary board state around turn 6 or something like that, if you can just lay down an austere command and clean all of that out, then you're going to give yourself a really good chance to be doing the things you want to do. Of course, you're going to want to not blow away too many of your own permanents in that process, so slow rolling if you can is a really good place to be for that type of thing. But yeah, the removal will allow you to dictate the pace of the game a little bit better, because like I said, this deck has been a little bit slow. It doesn't exactly come out screaming. So with that being the case, you will want to be able to slow everyone else down a little bit, and I've got some cards in there to be able to do that. But anyway, yeah, so this is the pile of cards that I think are very good, very playable, good for this deck, also good for a lot of other decks. This pile of equipments right here, these are all fantastic, have a lot of homes and a lot of different decks. Same thing with these right here as well. Actually, Hero's Blade I'm not the biggest fan of, but get rid of that one. One more over there. But the rest of these, very good. Black Blade Reforged can go in many decks. Boots, good everywhere. Mask of Avacyn is a nice source of hexproof. That's way cheaper than Champion's Helm. And Commander's Plate is also very expensive at the moment as well, So anyway, let's come over here. Like I said, some of these I could definitely go back and forth on. If you do your own playtesting and you find one that you really want to keep, by all means, go ahead and keep it. But for now, we're going to get rid of all these. And I will have a list of all these cards that you can check on, so that'll be in the description below. Make sure you check that out. If you're just looking for the list of cards that you want to pull out of the deck, because even once you do that, then you can make your own decisions about what you want to slot into the deck. A lot of times, cutting cards is the hardest part, so those are the ones that I think really don't belong. And once you do that, this will give you a clearer picture of like, okay, I can kind of figure out what things I want to add, but once I know what to get rid of, that tends to be the challenge for a lot of people. Anyway, let's get into the adds. Okay, so next up, we're looking at the additions for Wyleth. And right now, we've got about 35 cards we're looking at, coming in around $58. We're probably going to have to cut a few more things along the way just to get down to 100 cards and hopefully bring the dollar cost down a little bit in the process. But here's what I'm looking at. So we've got 6 creatures in the deck. Again, I've made the choice to go for a really low creature count because Wyleth just doesn't give you much incentive to have a lot of other creatures in play. You want a bunch of things stacked on Wyleth, so you're drawing those cards. First up, we see Hushbringer, and this is really about disrupting your opponents. Either it's going to hurt them badly and slow them down and be annoying for them, or they're going to shoot it, which means they're not shooting Wyleth. Both of which are really good for you. So its whole purpose is just disrupting opponents, and in a pinch, you can put some equipment on it if you need to. Next up, we have Pure Steel Paladin. Fantastic for equipment decks. Free equips, card draw, everything you want. Walking Atlas, this is a nice piece of ramp in decks that draw a lot, because there will be points in the game where like you draw a couple lands at a time, and being able to get an extra land in untapped is actually a pretty big deal. So I do like this as a ramp piece for the deck. Next up, we've got Stonehewer Giant. Fantastic for equipment decks, so must include, and it's a warrior. That will matter later. And then we have Godo Bandit Warlord, also great for equipment decks. The thing we're not seeing here, if you're not on a budget, you can add Helm of the Host, and that'll give you a nice win condition so that when you run into Godo, you dig out the Helm, and then you put the Helm on, and then you've got infinite combats and infinite damage, so that is a really nice way to close out the game, but unfortunately doesn't fit into the budget of what we're doing today. And then finally, we've got Sun Titan, one of the best creatures in white. It's reanimation, it's a win condition, it's just awesome, so we need to include it here. Gives us a way to get our stuff back, which is really important. And honestly, I wouldn't mind another card or two that brings things back. Moving on from that, we move into the spells. We've got Faith Shield. So the thing everyone talks about now in Commander is needing cheap and efficient spot removal, and people have really decreased their board wipe counts in favor of more spot removal. Faith Shield is the perfect answer to that, because for 1 white mana, any permanent you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So you can fizzle so many different types of removal with it. It's fantastic. Protect yourself from a Blasphemous Act, and in a pinch, give yourself unblockable so you can get in for lethal. Sajiri Shelter, same sort of thing, except it protects only creatures, but it is a land on the backside, so it is one of the dual face cards, which is also really nice. Open the Armory, tutor for equipments and auras, fantastic, must include for this deck. A couple things with this. Early game, you're going to want value pieces. That's going to be Sword of the Animist, Dowsing Dagger, Mask of Memory. Later game, that's when you're going to want stuff to close it out. For this deck in particular, probably Sunforger. Sunforger is probably going to be the most powerful late game thing that you can go for. If it's unavailable or if it's already in play, probably something like a Blackblade Reforged most of the time. Obviously, do what makes sense, but based on the many equipment decks that I've played over the years and what I see in this deck, those are kind of the patterns of how you'll want to tutor for your equipment most of the time. Winds of Abandon, one-sided board wipe, can also be spot removal, is a little bit skill intensive. You got to be careful with it because feeding your opponents a bunch of lands can be a problem, but it is also a way to remove blockers, which is great, so it gives you a lot of flexibility, and it doesn't hit your commander when you need to blow up the board. Chandra's Ignition, same sort of thing, another one-sided board wipe. Volcanic Offering, I always count this thing as like a half a board wipe. Blowing up the 2 biggest creatures in play in 2 lands really sets people back a lot. So many people talk about like ramping on 2 and getting into their commander on turn 3 and trying to create a lot of value. Volcanic Offering is the type of card that completely stops that. You blow up their commander, you blow up the land, and now they're really far behind. So Volcanic Offering is a wonderful card, and you get to let opponents participate in their own demise, which also makes it fun. Austere Command, my favorite board wipe. I don't leave home without it. Mob Rule is an incredible card. So for 70 cents, this is one of the best finishers I've ever seen. This card allows you to win the game out of nowhere. Even if your board state is completely gone, you just cast a Mob Rule, borrow your opponent's stuff, and you can easily kill 1 or more players. So it's been a fantastic card, and especially the fact that it's less than $1 makes it even more awesome. Blasphemous Act, super good removal in red, definitely worth having here. All right, next up, we're going to talk about our equipment a little bit. First up is Prying Blade. It's not the best card, but it's not the worst card either. As a cheaply costed equipment, it will get you a little bit of extra mana. It gives you a little bit of power. It's very reasonable in a deck like this, just that it never really blows you away. Armillary Sphere, I preach this a lot. I want cards that find lands even if they don't ramp. Armillary Sphere is great on a budget. I love Gift of Estates and Tithe. Tithe, unfortunately, out of the budget. Even Gift of Estates, we could probably fit it in, but I've also just reached the point of I don't want to change any more than 35 cards from the list, so take your pick. You can run Armillary Sphere or Gift of Estates, or both. I would probably recommend both if you can. And both of these work really well with Walking Atlas, so keep that in mind. But then we see Dowsing Dagger. This is one of our best ramp equipments in combination with Sword of the Animist. So if you have an early game Open the Armory or early game equipment tutor, you're probably going to want to go for Dowsing Dagger or Sword of the Animist most of the time with this deck. These things just do so much to get you the mana you need to have like a really big turn 7, turn 8. And I've really grown a love for Dowsing Dagger over the past year because Sword of the Animist takes a few turns to really get going. Like, you need to get 2 or 3 triggers out of it to really kind of start feeling ahead. Dowsing Dagger, you hit once and it flips over, and then you've got yourself 3 mana back. That's a really good feeling. And that's all colored mana. It just does so much. The only real problem with Dowsing Dagger is that sometimes it's tricky to get flipped over. Opponents will shoot your stuff, and that's a problem. But when that doesn't happen, it's been a wonderful card. So like I said, early game tutors, you're probably going to want Sword of the Animist and Dowsing Dagger, because that ramp is really what's going to propel you to have a good mid-game and good late game. Sword of the Animist, we've been talking about it a little bit. Unfortunately, $11, eating up a lot of the budget, but I do think it's too important to not have in the deck because mana production is just so crucial to having success with a deck, and this card allows you to produce mana. So I don't love that it's so expensive. I wish it would get reprinted, but I do think it's worth the $11 that it's listed at, so just something we have to deal with. Moving on from that, we see Thought Vessel. We do want the no max hand size for this deck, but also just a piece of mana ramp. Late in the game, I've noticed that I've been up around 10 cards quite a bit of the time, so we're going to run this alongside Reliquary Tower. Next up is an equipment that everyone forgets about, and that's Heirloom Blade. For the most part, it's just an aggressively costed +3/+1, which actually makes it better than a lot of other equipments, but it does have the upside of if the creature dies, you essentially cascade until you find a creature type that shares a type with it, and you put that into your hand. We don't have a lot of creatures in the deck, but Stonehewer Giant is a warrior, so you'll be able to get that, and Godo is a human, and both of those are wonderful. Pure Steel Paladin is also a human, so that function is definitely secondary in the deck, but should your commander get blown up, it'll trigger, and you'll be able to get one of these other really good creatures into your hand, so it's just a nice thing to have. And you can go deeper on building around this if you want to. I haven't right here. It doesn't require that you have a lot of creatures. It kind of likes having just a small number of really good creatures to go get, so something you can play around with a little bit more if you want to, but it is a cool card. Maul of the Skyclave is just nice. It's 2/2, it's flying, it's first strike, all great abilities. Attaches itself for free the first time, which I also really like. Just a nice card to have. Tenza Godo Maul. This is +3/+3 in Trample. It already has Trample naturally, but occasionally you may have to put it on something else. But this turns Wyleth into a 5/5. Again, it's also pretty aggressively costed. Just a nice equipment to have. Hedron Archive for the ramp. Thran Dynamo, also for the ramp. I've said it before, I'll repeat it. Thran Dynamo is the third best mana rock behind Soul Ring and Mana Crypt. If you get this down on like turn 4 or turn 5, you're going to be able to make a lot of mana going into turns 6, 7, and 8, and you should be able to have some pretty good turns with Thran Dynamo in play. And then finally in the artifacts, we see another stacks piece. This is God Pharaoh Statue, so similar to Hushbringer, the function here is slowing down your opponents. Like I've said a few times, this deck hasn't been blazing fast, so with that being the case, you do need to slow your opponents down. And this card is great against people that just like value and are trying to like draw a million cards and ramp a million cards. It essentially puts all your opponents in slow motion, and it's fantastic. Also, if for some reason they end up at 1 life, it will take them out of the game. But yeah, this is a permanent that you're putting into play that now they have to interact with this thing, or they're just going to have a really hard time doing anything. The options are either they get stuck or they shoot it, which means they aren't shooting Wyleth. And both of those are really good outcomes for you. Moving on from that, we have a couple enchantments. We have Griff Spoon, 1/0 and flying, has the ability to come back, is nice. Hyena Umbra, the totem armor, is really good, gives us a way to protect our commander a little bit. All That Glitters can put a lot of power on Wyleth very quickly, so I like that one. Duelist Heritage, the all-important double strike. Not a ton of double strike in this deck, we could certainly have a bit more, but Duelist Heritage is one of the best sources for it. Gift of Immortality, I like this one because it's a really nice piece of protection. You don't necessarily need to run with Gift of Immortality, but it's just good. This whole deck is about keeping your commander in play. Gift of Immortality gives you the ability to do that, regardless of why it died. And then finally, one final stacks piece, Rule of Law. So last night I was testing this deck, and there were some games where I had like Hushbringer and Archon of Emeria in play, and those really did a lot against some higher power decks. Instead of Archon of Emeria, I decided to go Rule of Law just because, again, there's not a ton of incentive to run other creatures in this deck, and I decided to go with the additional durability of Rule of Law versus Archon of Emeria, which is a creature and can be easily blown up. But you could certainly go the other way on that too if you want to. If you want more creatures in the deck, Archon of Emeria is going to be a great idea. These can be a little bit tricky to play. You may need to play them a few times to really get the hang of them if you're not used to playing these type of effects. But if you see someone that's really far ahead, it's a good time to slam one of these. But the other time to do it is if you're really far ahead. So like if you've already made a lot of your big plays and you're just kind of at the point where I just need a couple turns to like swing away and kill everyone without them doing too much, that's when you want to slam a Rule of Law. The times not to do it, if you've got a bunch of cards in your hand, I'm like, all right, I need to make a bunch of plays over the next couple turns to really get myself where I need to. That is not the time to slam a Rule of Law. So like I said, it's a little bit skill intensive, but it is very powerful. And if you're really behind or if you're really ahead, it can do a lot when you're in either of those scenarios. And then finally, we just have a couple lands that we're adding to the deck. We've got Mistveil Plains for the Sunforger combo, Reliquary Tower for the no max hand size. Shatterskull the Hammer Pass is really nice because it's a removal or a land. Ended up in the other category for some reason, but Sajiri Shelter is protection or land, so both of those are nice. You could go much deeper spicing up the mana base for this deck, and I certainly would if it's a deck that you're looking to play long term. But for the time being, I think these are going to be some of the bigger changes. The other two that I might look at, but again, out of budget, kind of just ran out of card slots that I really wanted to change, is going to be War Room and Bonder's Enclave are both really good for the card draw. Even Mokokoro and Gaia Reach Sanitarium, all very reasonable. In a Voltron deck, you probably want Homeward Path as well. So again, there's a lot you can do with the lands, but it does increase the number of cards we're changing and the cost of changes, so just some ideas to keep in the back of your mind that if this is a deck you're going to play a lot, spicing up that mana base will help you get a lot more utility. Anyway, let's jump back over here. I'm actually going to add these cards into the deck now. And after we do that, we'll try to cut this thing down to 100. All right, so we've got all the cards added into the deck. Question is, what are we taking out? Kind of got a lot of 2-drops. We could probably lighten up at 2 mana just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to cut 2 basics from the deck. We have 39 lands with the flip lands in the deck. So we'll cut a mountain, and we'll cut a plains. Our actual land count is 37. Means we need to get rid of 3 cards. I'm thinking Tiana. Tiana's fine. And being able to get your stuff back is cool, but has a weird timing restriction to it, which I don't love. If it shows up after the board wipe, then that's not the best. So we can live without Tiana. Really love to cut a 2-drop here. I don't love it, but I'm going to go for the Armillary Sphere. I really do like those cards that find a lot of lands, but I should honestly probably cut something else, but here we are. We'll go on the hope that Wyleth's card draw will bail us out of it, make sure we hit all the lands like we need to, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't. And one more cut to go. I'm going to check out the removal pile real quick. Just get a feel on how much removal we actually have. Actually looking not too bad on removal, so I'm going to remove Jaya's Immolating Inferno. You could certainly keep it if you want, but we need to get down to 100 here, so that's what I'm going to go for. So here's what we're looking at deck list-wise. We see very low mana curve, but that is a good thing because we don't have tons and tons of ramp in the deck. I've added Hedron Archive, Thran Dynamo, just to give us something like if you have to recast Wyleth and re-equip and do all that kind of stuff. Those are really handy for that. Handy for getting to your 6-drops also. There's a few other things if you want to tinker around with it. They seem to be reasonable. Akroma's Will is certainly a card you could look at. This thing's been very good in the testing that I've done, but just, again, run out of card slots at this point. Protector of the Crown is one that I had a lot of fun with last night. All damage that would be dealt to you is dealt to Protector of the Crown instead. So if you put Indestructible or something like Unquestioned Authority on it, it's going to prevent all of that damage from creatures, and it won't even die because of the damage prevention. So that's certainly something you can fool around with if you want to. It's a cute little trick, and it's just a nice way to protect yourself. You can also use Palisade Giant. Very similar, except it says all damage that will be dealt to you and other permanents you control is dealt to Palisade Giant, so that even protects your creatures from Blasphemous Act and things like that. Same sort of thing, you put Indestructible on it, and you've got yourself a brick wall. You no longer care about damage. Certainly something you can explore with the deck. There's any number of other equipment and auras that could be good in the deck. Some things that I'd like to see are a little bit more recursion, definitely spicing up the mana base a bit, even just like Tectonic Edge and Ghost Quarter type stuff will help quite a bit. I think we can add a Ghost Quarter without changing the budget too much, so we'll do that. So finally, getting beyond the budget of what's in scope for this video, I'll talk about a few upgrades if you're not working on a budget and you're just trying to make the deck as powerful as you can. Here's some of the most impactful upgrades that you can make if you're not looking to stay on a budget. That's going to be Sword of Feast and Famine. This thing is just ridiculous. It doubles your mana, gives you protection from 2 colors, and makes your creature bigger, and makes them discard. It's absolutely insane. And I'm almost always going to tutor for this in the middle turns of the game. If it's around turn 5 or turn 6, and I'm trying to set up for that really big turn, Sword of Feast and Famine is going to allow you to do that. Next up, we have Teferi's Protection. You can get this with Sunforger, and it's just a game changer. This card finds a way to be useful in 100% of games that you play, because someone's either going to try to damage you, blow up your stuff, target you with something, or just do something that Teferi's Protection will find a way to protect you from. So good, but so expensive. Enlightened Tutor, it's a 1-mana tutor. It's just good. Find equipments, find auras, and find your fast mana. Yep, tutors are just good. Along that same line, Steel Shaper's Gift is also really powerful. Tutoring for Sword of the Animist or Dousing Dagger on turn 1 is a play that I go for quite a bit because I know how much value those things generate. So then you can just set all your turns up beautifully, and, by turn 4 or so, you're able to have a lot of extra mana to your name, and that's a great place to be. But later in the game, you're going to find that Feast and Famine, that Black Blader Forged, or that Sunforger, and it's also great for that. And then the same sort of thing, Stoneforge Mystic, tutor for those equipments, and it gives you the body to put those equipments on, which is fantastic. So many times it's been Stoneforge Mystic, go get Sword of the Animist, equip it, start swinging, getting that value. these are going to be your 5 really big upgrades if you're looking to spend a little bit of money on this deck that are all going to be really impactful. Sword of Fire and Ice, I don't think is a high priority investment for this deck because it has card draw built in. The 2 damage by itself is fine, but typically you need double strike or some sort of like Aurelia trigger. You really need about 4 damage to kill a lot of high priority targets on the table. So a single Sword of Fire and Ice trigger is generally a bit weaker than some of the other swords. It's when you get multiples of Fire and Ice triggers that it becomes very good because you can start shooting down the things that really matter. So kind of a next step. Sword of Sinew and Steel is going to be my second favorite sword overall because it's artifact and planeswalker removal, protection from red, which means you can load up on the red board wipes, which I really like. So that's another thing to look at as well if you're going outside the budget. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to wrap this up there. Hope you guys have enjoyed this look at Wyleth and the Arm For Battle Precon. Be sure to check out the gameplay that I did for this deck. I'll link that in the description below. You can kind of get a feel on what's going on. And again, there's still a lot of tweaks you can make to this deck, a lot of trial and error I've noticed going into Wyleth. So this is very much a starting point for you. If you feel like you need to turn some dials in some different directions, more removal, less removal, more creatures, less creatures, that type of stuff, certainly feel free to do so. But anyway, yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching. I want to thank my awesome Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. If you want to help support the channel and vote on which decks I play next, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below.